Lightning ripped across the hangar ceiling as a storm-slashed Blackhawk sat stranded on Labor Day weekend rotors, silent in the dim hangar. Captain Eliza Eli Carter VIII pressed her polished flight badge against the fluorescent glare and inhaled the bittersweet scent of cold coffee. What does a single act of faith mean to you? Share your thoughts below. A sudden gust of wind sent sheets of rain lashing across the UH-60 Blackhawk's canopy as Captain Eliza Eli Carter guided it onto the flooded tarmac of Coastal Bend Airfield. That morning in the base mess hall, Eli had quietly brewed coffee and passed out sticky donuts to the crew, her unspoken way of easing anxieties before a storm. Now, dark clouds hovered over the runway, and she could almost taste the salt carried in each gust off the Gulf of Mexico. Eli eased the collective down just enough to keep the rotors barely clearing the shallow water. Her boots slipped slightly as she climbed into the cockpit, the hiss of pressurized hydraulics and the creak of damp leather filling the cramped space. A quick tap on the intercom summoned Lieutenant Marcos Reyes, whose grateful nod told her he appreciated the early shot of caffeine more than he let on. Private Douglas hovered nearby, eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and fear. Last week's slip on the maintenance bay floor still lingered in his mind, and Eli gave him a reassuring smile, a silent promise she would see them all through this. Base Commander Whitaker arrived in a swirl of wind and rain, his uniform plastered to his chest, and the brim of his cap dripping onto the brim of the hovercraft's windshield. He pointed to a laminated map clipped to the bulkhead, his voice cutting through the storm. "They said you couldn't fly this bird in these conditions." The words landed like a boot heel, and she felt the familiar tingle of anticipation rather than fear. "Port Aransas," he said, tapping the soggy paper. 9 miles east. Power's out. Medics and civilians are stranded. They need you." Reyes handed Eli a drenched envelope. She peeled it open. The ink blurred slightly as she read a line from his mother, recalling childhood dances under hurricane lanterns. Despite the storm's roar, her fingertips tingled with warmth at the memory of those small-town festivities. She folded the letter and tucked it into her flight suit pocket. "We'll get them home," she said softly. Private Douglas ducked into the cockpit to strap himself in, fumbling with the safety harness as the wind tugged at his uniform. Eli leaned across the console to tighten his straps. He flashed her a grateful grin as she settled back into her seat. Behind her, the engines groaned to life, and the Blackhawk shuddered as its twin turbines fought against the gale. The radio crackled, and the faint strains of "Stand By Me" drifted through static oldies 101. 3 battling interference to keep everyone grounded in a familiar refrain. She guided the collective upward, feeling the rotors catch each blast of wind. The runway lights glowed through the haze, their reflections rippling on the standing water. As the helicopter rose, the nose dipped slightly, and she corrected with a practiced push on the cyclic. Her vision was a kaleidoscope of rain rotor wash and the distant glow of Port Aransas's streetlights. She inhaled, tasting diesel and rain on her tongue. Below, puddles sloshed against concrete barriers as the Blackhawk lifted free of the wet tarmac. The moment the skids cleared the pavement, a loud pop rang out, and a warning light flashed, indicating the front landing gear isn't fully secured. For an instant, her stomach flipped, but she held her breath only long enough to verify the hydraulics responded. The light blinked urgently, but there was no time to waste. She banked left, angling the helicopter into the wind, and called out, continuing to outbound. "Watch that gear, Patel." Sergeant Patel's calm voice came through checked hydraulic pressure. "Light looks advisory for now, Captain." His reassurance eased the tight coil in her chest. Eli's hands moved smoothly, one on the collective, one on the cyclic, as the Blackhawk climbed into the gathering gloom. Below, the edge of Corpus Christi Bay shimmered in the storm's fleeting lightning. For a brief second, she caught sight of a lone figure on a rooftop waving a flashlight through the deluge. That single, desperate beam reminded her why she volunteered for this mission, to bring people home no matter the storm. And despite what they said she couldn't do, the Black Hawk soared with purpose beneath her steady command. Left yaw, 50, Eli commanded, voice steady even as the red engine alarm light pulsed in her peripheral vision. The UH-60 Black Hawk shuddered as ice-cold hail pelted the windshield, each icy pellet rattling against the acrylic glass like distant gunfire. All around her, lightning split the roiling clouds, illuminating the cockpit in stark white bursts. Below, Corpus Christi Bay churned with angry waves, each swell dragging at the helicopter's skids. The faint strains of Stand By Me crackled through static on the comms. Oldies 101.3, fighting its way through interference, the same melody she and Douglas had hummed over donuts hours earlier. It felt like a lifeline to home, a promise that familiar comforts still existed beyond the storm's fury. Sergeant Patel's calm voice cut through the roar. Oil pressure's dropping in engine 2. I'm running auxiliary diagnostics. He leaned over the console, fingers dancing across switches, his face lit by the flicker of warning lights. Patel had flown with her long enough to know that panic solved nothing. His quiet competence bolstered her own resolve. On the radio, Lieutenant Reyes's tone was clipped but urgent. Port Aransas outpost just went dark. No power, no comms. They're counting on us. The words tightened a chord in Eli's chest. In moments like this, hesitation could cost lives. She exhaled slowly, centering herself with one deep, deliberate breath, a technique she'd practiced beneath calmer skies. Switch to auxiliary power, she said, voice gentle but resolute. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, flicking the power selector. The helicopter groaned as it shifted systems, and the altimeter needle dipped suddenly. Their altitude was bleeding away. Lightning flashed again, revealing a jagged coastline fragmented by floodwaters. Shingles drifted like rafts on the waterlogged streets, and the outlines of half-submerged vehicles dotted neighborhoods that only hours before had thrummed with daily life. Somewhere in that tangle of rooftops and trees, families huddled in darkened rooms waiting for help. Patel muttered, "We're losing 100 feet a minute." Eli's jaw tightened. "Maintain heading," she directed, easing the cyclic forward. The rotors fought back, carving through the gale. Each burst of thrust felt like a promise she planned to keep. A sudden crack of thunder rattled the cabin as a window seal popped loose. A spray of rain misted the instrument panel, and Eli's visor fogged for an instant. She tapped her goggles to clear them, every muscle tense. Below, the rooftops flashed into view again, and there, standing atop a metal vent, was a small group of figures waving flashlights through the deluge. Their beams danced like fireflies in the storm. Visual on target, Reyes reported. Coordinates match last known position. The confirmation felt like a lifeline. Eli banked left, her knuckles whitening on the cyclic. The helicopter rocked perilously, but she held her nerve. Patel's steadying hand on the intercom switch kept communication open. As they hovered above the stranded outpost, Eli's heart hammered. The wind roared in her ears, drowning out all but the thunder. She scanned her instruments, fuel levels, good altitude just above rooftop height, but the engine alarm still blinked red. Time was slipping away. "Prepare for hoist," she called. "Patel, ready the winch." His affirmation came through as a calm nod. A moment later, the cable whirred into view through the cargo door. Eli watched as it descended, each foot of line feeding out into the storm. Below, a dozen frightened silhouettes clustered on a small rooftop, arms raised in desperate hope. Their faces were indistinct in the rain, but Eli recognized the universal language of fear and trust. She steadied her breathing and gave a soft nod. Suddenly, a violent lurch rocked the Black Hawk. Its skids scraped something hidden beneath the water's surface. A sudden thump shook the entire cabin, flinging loose equipment against the bulkhead. The winch motor screeched to a halt. Eli's mind snapped into action. "Hold position," she barked, though her voice was measured. Patel's fingers danced over the console, rerouting power to the hoist. Reyes's voice crackled. "They can't wait much longer." She inhaled deeply, pivoting the cyclic to counter the drift. The rotor blades screamed, slicing through wind and rain with desperate force. Beneath them, the stranded outpost teetered between ruin and rescue. The cable trembled again as power restored to the hoist. Eli watched the winch wheel with determined eyes. Below, the figures braced against the rising water, their silhouettes small against the storm's backdrop. She would not let the storm claim them. And as the winch motor whirred back to life, she felt that familiar surge of purpose. No matter the fury of nature or the alarm bells in her cockpit, she would guide them home. Water surged past the open cargo ramp as Eli fought the cyclic to level the helicopter over the clinic's rooftop. Douglas's wide-eyed gratitude replayed in her mind. She would not leave these injured civilians unattended. The Black Hawk hovered mere feet above the battered concrete roof of Port Aransas Medical Clinic. Gale-force winds snapped debris against the fuselage, and the drumming of rain was a constant roar. Eli's boots were planted firmly on the floor's non-skid surface, her gloved hands steady on the controls. Behind her, Sergeant Patel monitored the instruments, his calm focus a silent anchor amid the chaos. "Hold," Eli murmured, leaning into the cyclic. Below, a handful of medics and clinic staff clung to battered equipment carts, eyes fixed upward. An elderly woman wrapped in a threadbare blanket clutched a frightened child to her chest. Eli scanned the shifting gust patterns and backed the helicopter into position. Through the cargo door, a rescue sling swung in the wind, its rope frayed at the edges but sturdy. On the comms, Lieutenant Reyes's voice crackled, coordinates locked. Wind gusts averaging 40 knots, watch for sudden shifts. The rooftop sagged visibly under waterlogged weight, and Eli felt the helicopter's downdraft buffet against weakened supports. Still, she refused to pull back. Lives depended on this. "Deploy sling," she called. Patel flicked a switch, and the cable whirred into the storm. The rescue hammock uncoiled in midair, thrashing like a caught fish. On the roof, Matthews stepped forward, a former Marine whose rugged frame was silhouetted against the gray sky. He braced against the downpour, muscles coiled as he lunged upward. Eli tightened her grip as Matthews caught the sling in one fluid motion and secured it to a rooftop vent. His fingers worked quickly, looping a bowline knot with practiced ease. A flash of lightning revealed his resolute expression, one of determination and gratitude. He had been one of the injured volunteers she'd quietly helped patch up earlier in the mess hall, never asking for recognition. Now he repaid that kindness with skill born of service. "Matthews is secure," Patel reported. Eli nodded and eased the collective, sending a slow tremor of movement through the craft. Below, the first medic crawled into the sling's safety harness, face pale but trusting. Patel engaged the winch, and the medic rose smoothly through the rain, disappearing into the dark belly of the Black Hawk. One by one, the clinic staff and patients followed. The elderly woman went up next, her quilted shawl snagging briefly on the rooftop's jagged edge. Eli adjusted her hover, guiding the sling away from shifting debris. As the woman's trembling feet lifted free of the slick surface, the child let out a quiet sob, fear and relief mingling in a single note. Eli reached toward the swell of the cabin, catching the child's gaze. With gentle hands, she bandaged a scraped knee and offered a whispered reassurance, almost safe. Patel's voice broke through. "Last patient clear." Eli exhaled, the tension coiling in her shoulders, loosening just enough for a heartbeat. But the storm wasn't done. A sudden rogue gust slammed into the helicopter's tail boom, pitching the bird sideways. Warning lights flashed as the cyclic shuddered in her grip. Counter, she called, shifting weight on the controls. The rotor blades bit into the wind as the Black Hawk righted itself, descending only inches before climbing to a steadier hover. Her heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. Patel's steady hand on the collective confirmed control was regained. For a moment, the cabin was silent, only the drone of the engines and the patter of rain on the roof. Matthews stood nearby, drenched and exhausted, yet he managed a nod of profound respect. No words were needed. Their shared glance spoke of trust earned and kindness returned. Below the rooftop's floodwater rippled in the rotor wash, and Eli watched the medics brace one last time as they secured the stretcher. Reyes's voice crackled again. "Well done, Captain. You've got clearance to depart." Eli backed the helicopter into the upwind current, water cascading off the skids. As the Black Hawk rose, she raised her binoculars and scanned the horizon. Through the mist and rain, a faint glow caught her eye, an SOS flare drifting over a distant marsh 2 hours' flight north. As the Black Hawk backed away, Eli's binoculars catch a distant SOS flare far to the north, over 2 hours away by air. The Black Hawk dipped low over a swollen river gorge as lightning split the sky, revealing the broken expanse of a collapsed concrete bridge. Eli's gaze flickered to the dashboard, where the engine alarm had briefly gone dark hope, but not quite reassurance. Below, the river's current churned around jagged beams of twisted steel, and rain pounded the rotor blades like a relentless drum. County Road 17. Bridge Reyes crackled over the comm. Mrs. Jensen's family on a ledge 4 feet above the waterline, children and her. His voice carried urgency beneath the storm's roar. Eli rocked the cyclic to counter a sudden gust, steadying the Black Hawk within the arch of the washed-out span. Sergeant Patel's calm tones guided her rotor clearance minimal. "Watch for rebar." His steady presence grounded her as she edged the helicopter closer. The wind snapped at her flight suit and tossed loose strands of her hair. She felt each pulse of the rotor wash against her gloves. Below, a silver-haired woman and 2 small figures huddled on a narrow ledge carved by erosion. Mrs. Jensen raised her voice against the wind, calling out, "Captain Carter, don't mind my baking tales, but I baked pies here every Sunday for church socials. You'll have to promise me a slice when the sun comes back." Her words, odd in their cheer, floated upward, a thread of humanity in a mechanical storm. Eli allowed herself a small smile before refocusing on the task. "Matthews, harness up," she said. The cable descended into the gloom. Lightning cast stark shadows over the river, and Eli's finger hovered on the hoist switch. Matthews knelt into view, securing his carabiner to the line and double-checking the knot. Wet hair plastered his forehead, but his eyes shone with determination. He waved once, then vanished into the downpour. Patel held the chopper steady, mere inches from hanging chunks of concrete. Through the cargo door, Eli tuned the handheld to a battered CB radio frequency, where a static-laced voice intoned, "You are never alone." The old local DJ's words crackled like a beacon of solidarity. She let the message wash over her as Matthew's silhouette reappeared beneath the beam of the landing light. He slid along the cable and latched onto a sturdy girder still jutting from the bridge. His gloved hands worked swiftly, looping the rescue line around the beam. Below him, the river swelled another foot. The storm showed no mercy, water crept closer to the ledge, and from somewhere upstream, wood and shards of concrete tumbled past. Eli's knuckles whitened on the cyclic. "Hold hover," she murmured, voice low. Patel monitored the gauge's arms, steady as she carved tiny adjustments against shifting gusts. In the brief lull between thunderclaps, she caught sight of Matthews's nod line secure. She exhaled, then pressed the hoist button. The cable shot upward, hauling Matthews back toward the helicopter. As his feet left the beam, a thunderous crack echoed through the gorge. Behind him, part of the bridge deck gave way, sending a spray of concrete into the river with a roar. Matthews's ascent hit a sudden jolt. He slumped against the sling, momentarily stunned before Patel's quick eye stabilized the winch. The chopper pitched as she compensated, thrusting them clear of falling debris. Matthews's hood flapped like a banner in the wind as he twisted back toward the cabin door. Eli keyed the mic. "Bring him aboard slowly, steady now." His boots thudded on the ramp as he climbed in, reins sluicing off his shoulders. Inside, he whispered, "Thank you, Captain." His eyes glistened despite the storm. For a moment she saw the gratitude that had driven him here, repaying the unheralded kindness she had shown long before this gale. She offered him a damp cloth and a nod. Reyes's voice cut in, "Families still out there. Water rising fast." Eli glanced back through the open hatch. The children clung to Mrs. Jensen's legs, her shawl billowing like a banner of hope. She raised her headset, deploy the sling again. 2 more go slow. Patel engaged the hoist, sending the cable down into the heart of the tempest. The wind screamed as the rescue hammock appeared beneath the bridge. In that instant, Eli held her breath, and then a low groan shook the air as the line trembled violently. Rain blurred her sight, but she sensed the shift beneath them, the bridge groaning under its own weight. The rescue line quivers under shifting weight, and Eli must decide whether to hover dangerously close or pull back until it's too late. "Hold! Hold!" Eli shouted over the storm as the Black Hawk's skids hovered inches above jagged debris. High above the fractured span of County Road 17 bridge, the rotors whipped rain into a fine mist that stung her cheeks. Whitaker's voice, once doubting, echoed in her mind. "They said you couldn't do it." Captain Carter. She let the memory fuel her resolve rather than shake it. Below, Mrs. Jensen's 2 grandchildren clung to her sides, their small faces streaked with rain and relief. Matthews steadied this cable beside the open cargo ramp, one hand gripping the sling, while the other steadied himself against the wind's pull. Sergeant Patel leaned close to the controls, his keen eyes trimming the helicopter's position until it hovered like a ruby at the heart of a storm. On the comms, Lieutenant Reyes cheered, "Almost there, keep her steady." His confidence was a lifeline through the roar. Eli's gloved hand eased the cyclic forward, nudging the Black Hawk, so that the rescue line dangled directly above the first grandchild. The boy's trembling fingers reached out, and Matthews steadied him with a gentle grip before clipping the harness into place. As Patel began the winch, Eli watched through the cargo door. The boy rose slowly, rain splattering his yellow slicker like shards of glass. His sister went next, her sobs muffled by the wind, but her grip on Matthews's jacket unbreakable. Eli caught a flash of Mrs. Jensen's grateful eyes before turning back to Matthews, whose weathered face relaxed into a proud, determined smile. Mrs. Jensen's quilted shawl whipped around her shoulders as she knelt into the sling. Eli balanced the helicopter with micro-adjustments, suppressing the urge to grip the controls too tightly. The bridge trembled beneath them, an ominous reminder that time was short. Rain pounded her helmet as Patel monitored the hoist's tension gauges, his voice calm, "Cable tension, good. 2 aboard." Then the bridge groaned like old timber. A massive section of concrete cracked free and plunged into the river below, sending a wall of water surging downstream. Debris skimmed the river's surface, threatening to collide with the rescue line. Eli's heart thumped in her ears as she steadied the cyclic cutting engine thrust, just enough to let Patel raise Mrs. Jensen clear of the crumbling structure. With a final tug, the elderly woman swung into the cabin, clutching her shawl and her grandchildren's photographs. As the ramp closed, Matthews offered a crisp salute to Eli, a gesture of profound respect born of shared courage. The tears on his cheeks glistened in the cockpit lights. Eli returned the salute with a nod, letting the humility of that moment settle in her chest. Patel eased the Black Hawk back into the wind, each rotor blade slicing cleanly through the gale. Survivors huddled beneath blankets, their eyes wide with gratitude. Reyes's voice crackled urgently, Captain Final SOS at the marshlands. This is the last one tonight. As the Black Hawk banks away, Reyes interrupts with urgency, Captain Final SOS at the marshlands. This is the last one tonight. Dawn light filtered through ragged clouds over flooded marshlands as the Black Hawk descended toward Laguna Madre's knee-deep waters. Mist clung to the submerged grasses, blurring the edges of rusted oil rig shelters that volunteers had turned into makeshift shelters. Below water lapped at wooden pilings and driftwood tangled around the stilts. The air tasted of brine and fresh rain, a bittersweet reminder that even the fiercest storms eventually yielded to calm. Inside the cabin, Captain Eliza Eli Carter scanned the scene with steady eyes. The silent kindness given to Douglas and Matthews now mirrored in Eli's calm instructions to Mrs. Hernandez below. Through the cargo door, she watched the local volunteer leader, a silver-haired woman wrapped in a patched field jacket, waving a weathered rope ladder toward the Black Hawk's hovering ramp. Each bounce of the ladder on the water's surface sent ripples across the murky floodplain. "Lower the ladder," Eli said, voice firm yet warm. She eased the collective, dropping the helicopter until the ladder's lowest rung hovered just above the water. Volunteers in soaked boots grasped the rope and hauled it toward the battered skiff tied to a nearby piling. Lieutenant Reyes crackled through the intercom, skiffs in position. "They've got medkits ready." His tone carried relief. After 2 nights of relentless rescues, this final mission promised closure. Reyes had guided rescue boats from the air all morning, his calm authority anchoring each volunteer's courage. Sergeant Patel crouched beside her, fingers poised over the winch controls. His gaze flicked between the gauges and the ladder as Eli's practiced command carved through the mist. Below, Mrs. Carmen Hernandez raised a hand to her forehead, scanning the cabin for a reassuring smile. Eli lifted her headset. "Mrs. Hernandez, once you're steady, climb up slowly. We've got you." A chorus of splashes and grunts rose from below as the first volunteer, a young man with a rain-soaked cap, began his ascent. His boots slipped on the wet rungs, and Eli held her breath, her gloved hand tapping a steady rhythm on the console. With a final determined pull, he cleared the water and scrambled onto the ramp. Patel engaged the winch, and the volunteer was drawn safely into the cabin, dripping and wide-eyed. "Pack those medkits inside," Eli instructed. "Leave the red bag where Patel can grab it next." The volunteer dumped his load, the kits thumping against the deck, and then moved aside for the next evacuee. Mrs. Hernandez climbed last, her shawl trailing like a banner. She paused on the lowest rung to look back at her volunteer team huddled on the skiff, offering a soft prayer of thanks that drifted up through the open door. Eli felt the weight of that prayer settle in her chest. She remembered the simple coffee gestures in the mess hall and the gratitude etched on Douglas's face. Now, hundreds of miles from that first rescue, those same small acts of care had rippled outward, cementing trust in every town and every person she encountered. The helicopter climbed again, each rotor beat pushing them away from the marsh, but closer to safety. A shaft of pale sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting on the wind-whipped water and illuminating the volunteers' grateful faces. Beneath the hum of the engines, Eli thought she could hear the stirring chords of "Here Comes the Sun" triumphantly rising from her headset, a final flourish from Oldies 101.3 that felt like a benediction. Suddenly, a rogue gust swung the rope ladder askew, sending its wet ropes slapping against the oil rig platform below. Eli's instincts kicked in. She dove the Black Hawk forward, plunging the nose toward the marsh to catch the ladder's arc. Patel's steady hands on the winch countered the swing, drawing Mrs. Hernandez fully aboard in a single smooth motion. The rescue team let out an exultant cheer that blended with the dying thunder. Secured within the cabin, the volunteers collapsed against blankets, their damp coats shedding rivulets of water across the floor. Matthews handed out bottled water and shared quiet smiles, his presence a testament to the power of unheralded kindness. Mrs. Hernandez, clutching her Bible, found Eli's hand and squeezed it, a silent covenant that this mission had healed more than just bodies. It had uplifted spirits. High above the marsh, Whitaker's clear, measured tone crackled over the calm, "Captain Carter. You've done more than I ever expected. Welcome home." The words hung in the cabin like a warm beacon. Eli allowed herself to close her eyes for a heartbeat, letting pride and relief wash through her. Outside, the dawn broke fully, and the flooded fields shone with golden light. Through the cargo door, volunteers lifted their hands in silent salute. In that moment, Eli understood that kindness delivered without fanfare had proven to be the strongest force of all. As dawn's first light glimmered on the waterlogged fields, the Black Hawk's mission stood as a testament to quiet courage in the face of overwhelming odds. From coffee-warmed donuts in a sleepy hangar to life-saving rescues beneath shattered bridges, each act of unheralded kindness wove a lifeline through the storm. True compassion asks nothing in return, yet it has a way of finding its way home, transforming doubt into trust and strangers into neighbors. Perhaps the next time you see someone in need, a simple gesture, a warm smile, a shared blanket, or a helping hand can ripple through your community like a beacon in the night. After all, when judgment is set aside, the smallest kindness can light the darkest skies.